Good afternoon to all of you. Dissecting the Government Budget 2022. So let me warmly welcome all of you for the inaugural post-budget forum organized by the Central Bank Studies of Central Bank of Sri Lanka. So during the next 2 hours, with the contribution of our respected speakers and panelists, we will be dissecting the government budget presented to the Parliament yesterday and see how it could make an impact to the overall economy. So today we have a very interesting lineup, starting with the keynote speech to be delivered by the Governor of Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Honorable Ajith Nivard Cabraal, followed by the guest speech to be delivered by Mr. Attygalle, Secretary to the Treasury of Minister of Finance. And then we will be having a panel discussion in which we will be looking into the sectoral impact of the budget. So for this esteemed panel, we are joined by Mr. Duminda Hulangamuwa, Senior Partner and Head of Tax at Ernst & Young, Mr. Krishan Balendra, Chairman, John Keells Holdings, Mr. Jonathan Alice, CEO of Hatton National Bank, Mr. Hasitha Premaratne, Group Finance Director, Brandix Apparel, Mr. Thilak Piyadigama, CEO of SDB Bank, and this panel discussion will be moderated by Dr. Chandranath Amarasekara, Director of Economics Department of Central Bank of Sri Lanka. So you can direct your questions for this discussion through the Q&A option in the Zoom platform. All our participants can do so. And we will try to accommodate your questions as much as possible with the given time. However, before proceeding further, let us first have a look at the highlights of the budget 2022. A video presentation has been compiled on this. So let's have a look at that and come back to the forum. with that, I guess all of you having a better understanding and idea on highlights of the budget following that presentation. So without further ado, let me now invite the Deputy Governor of Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Mr. NWJ Nanakkara, to deliver opening remarks for the forum. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone. First of all, it's my great pleasure to welcome Mr. Ajith Cabraal, the Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, and the keynote speaker today, and also Mr. S.R. Attygalle, Secretary to the Treasury and Minister of Finance, and our guest speaker, and also the esteemed panelists representing various sectors of the economy. We think would be in a position to provide much needed clarity to the people about the document, the year 2022 annual budget. And also, I would like to thank all of you for accepting the invitation and joining with us on a Saturday afternoon. You all will agree with me, the government budget, especially in Sri Lanka, is going to be the most important policy guidance that would be coming out of the government to the rest of the economy. It has impact. We believe it has impact on all the sectors of the economy. And not only the impact, it also provides much needed the guidance, the policy guidance, as well as the clarity in terms of government policies for the coming year, and also for the medium term, if you like it. I think the year 2022 budget is going to be very important to us because we are trying to come out of a very challenging period. We all know the impact, the devastating impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought into Sri Lanka. It's not only Sri Lanka, entire globe actually. And with this challenging domestic and global environment, I think everybody, all the stakeholders would like to hear from the government as to what kind of policies the government is going to be taking in the year 2022, and then the near term, and then going forward. I think now the policy is clearly set out in the government budget, which was presented to the Parliament by Honorable Finance Minister yesterday. I think that the challenge is, the most important thing is creating awareness among people about these policies and what thinking went behind in making these policies and for what benefits. So Central Bank strongly believes that creating awareness among the stakeholders is definitely going to help achieving the expected outcome, the output of any policy initiatives. Having that in mind, we strongly believe that the esteemed panelists who are joining today, and before that, I'm sorry, the keynote speaker, Governor Cabraal, and then Mr. Attygalle, I think their thinking definitely must have gone into the thinking process for the documentation, the policy formulation. They would be able to set the stage for the panelists to take us through the policy initiatives of the government, which are clearly articulated in the year 2022 budget. So without taking much time, and before concluding my remarks, let me thank Honorable Governor Mr. Cabraal, and also Mr. Attygalle, and all the members of the panel and the moderator for your time and contribution to this online forum, and for your knowledge, opinions, and experience that you would be sharing with us today. With that, I would like to now invite the Honorable Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Ajith Cabraal, to deliver the keynote address, please. Keynote speech, please. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy Governor Dhammika. I appreciate the effort put in by the Central Bank to host this very useful webinar, which I'm sure would be of great use to many stakeholders. I also want to add my welcome to the Treasury Secretary, whom I know would have spent many sleepless nights in developing the budget, as well as all the key speakers from the private sector, Mr. Duminda Hulangamuwa, Mr. Krishan Balendra, Mr. Jonathan Allis, Mr. Hasitha Premaratne, and Mr. Thilak Piyadigama, for having responded to the Central Bank's invitation to participate at this seminar. I also want to thank the Center for Business Studies for organizing this seminar, as well as the ER, the Economic Research Department, for setting out a very comprehensive 5-minute set of slides with regard to the synopsis of the budget. Now, going into the budget itself, I believe it is a document which many people look forward to, mainly because they know it will set the stage for the next 1 year of the government's policies as well as government's intentions, as captured in the results that are expected. And therefore, it is something that they can themselves shape their own policies. So in that context, I think it's a very important part of the whole economic data out there. And I believe the fact that it is in extremely challenging circumstances that we are today discussing this budget means it is even more vital that we get to grips of this situation. At the same time, I believe all of you may have also seen and heard, as well as examined, the roadmap that the Central Bank published and issued on the 1st of October, which will take us through to the next 6 months with regard to the external sector of the country, as well as the banking sector, and also how we are going to manage the current challenges that have been thrust upon us by COVID, as well as the global conditions. And I believe these two main documents, which you have before you, will help you to understand the way forward as far as the government and the central bank is concerned, and also the way forward as to how you would shape your own businesses as well as enterprises in relation to what's going to take place over the next few months and years. I think the most important feature of any country is that there should be growth. It's vital that growth be fostered and be promoted, because only when there is growth that we can address the issues of poverty, we can address the issues of people having better standards of living, and also our rest of the macro fundamentals becoming more benign than what we have seen as of now. So growth is vital, and in order to ensure that we can generate growth, the policies have to be so framed and fashioned to foster this growth. So I believe the finance minister would have taken that into consideration when he was preparing his budget, because notwithstanding the very tough conditions, it is vital that a country has growth. To give you an example, I remember Sri Lanka had grown to an economy of $79 billion by the end of 2014. Now, during the last 7 years, the growth has been greatly stagnant. And even though we had some growth in the years 2017 and 2018, by 2019, it had shrunk to some extent. And by 2020, in the midst of COVID, we have even had to undergo further contraction. And by 2020 mid-period, we had once again come back to a GDP of around about the same number of $79 billion. So which means our rest of the macro fundamentals would have become a lot weaker because of a 7-year period during which time the growth has been extremely sluggish. So naturally, now we got to make sure that growth is back and that growth is fostered and growth is once again promoted. In that sense, I think the investment that the government has intended to provide to the economy is laudable, because it's only when you have investment and improvement in productivity that you can have growth on a sustainable basis. So I believe the finance minister would have taken that into consideration, and that is going to be a vital factor in Sri Lanka's development. In order to have growth, we also need to have income for the government to invest and for the private sector to invest. So there is a fine balance that will be needed in ensuring that both these sectors, the government sector as well as the private sector, will have sufficient capital to move forward with their business activities as well as other social and developmental activities. I believe the tax proposals that have been enunciated by the finance minister would be explained by the Treasury Secretary, so I won't go into those, but only to say that the underlying reason behind the budget's tax proposals as well as the other development proposals would be to ensure that this growth takes place. At the same time, we need to have stability, because it's very difficult to talk about growth unless the country as well as the economy is stable. In order to ensure that stability is also generated through our actions, the central bank has a special responsibility in that the Monetary Law Act demands that the central bank provides price and economic stability as well as financial system stability. And in that sense, I believe the steps that have been taken by the central bank as enumerated in the roadmap are very clear, and we'll need to ensure that those are implemented. I can assure you that there are several teams that are working on ensuring that the implementation of these policies as well as these plans are carefully done, and that is now at the priority list of the central bank as well. The other aspect of this whole exercise is to ensure that the debt is sustainable. There are many instances where several people ask us whether Sri Lanka needs to have debt restructuring. And I have to tell them, yes, what we need to do is to ensure that our debt is managed. I'm not going to use the word restructuring in a sense which is frivolous, but to say that every debt situation needs to be restructured on an ongoing basis. For example, if you have one debt where the interest rate is 7% or 8%, and if you can find another source from which you can borrow at a cheaper rate, then you would be technically restructuring your debt. And that's what sometimes people do not really realize. In the same manner, you could have a debt which is of a shorter duration, and if you are able to increase the period of the debt and also ensure that your payments are staggered even more, that is a sense of restructuring. If you can change the mix of your debt from foreign currency to local currency or between foreign currencies, that again is a type of a restructuring of your debt portfolio, which is to your advantage. So Sri Lanka has also understood that the reliance of Sri Lanka on international sovereign bonds has been quite sharp. And in the last few years, there has been a fairly extensive reliance on it. which now needs to be shifted in some way, so that we would have a greater control over the debts with a longer period of time. So that's why the government, very rightly, together with the central bank, is now examining the options of having government to government kind of loan situations, central bank to central bank swaps, the examination of the possibilities of securitizing remittances as well as other inflows. So these are all new options that the government is considering, together with the increase of the non-debt inflows. For example, the monetization of certain assets, or increasing the volumes of exports, increasing the volumes of remittances. These are all natural options that the central bank and the government is now examining in order to ensure that the debt profile and the debt positioning is a lot more sustainable than what it is now. I believe several of those ideas have been already put into action. We have spoken about it in the roadmap. And in the next few months, you would see a large number of those being implemented in order to ensure that Sri Lanka changes the way it would be doing its work, as well as the way it moves with the economy. So we are looking at a 5% growth this year, of course, on a much lower base of last year's negative growth of 3.6%. But 5% on that is a reasonable number. And next year, 2022, if we have a good year with tourism returning even to about 1/4 of the levels at which we were used to prior to 2019, I think Sri Lanka would be well on course for a 6% growth, which would mean that many of the macro fundamentals would look much better than what it is today. So we got to work towards that diligently, and we need to ensure that the stability is maintained. And in so doing, we would be able to support the government and its efforts to bring up more investment into the country. Already there are several areas of investments planned, particularly in the port city. The Port City Commission bill has already been passed, and it's a law now, which gives a massive amount of opportunities for those who are going to do business in the port city. One of the big accounting firms have already stated that it could add around $13 billion of GDP to the economy. So to an $80 billion economy, 13 billion is a substantial number if we can get that going very quickly. Plus, of course, the organic growth of our own economy now can also be extremely useful indicators of the potential of Sri Lanka. So what we now need to see is to realize this potential, make sure that the stability is maintained, make sure that the government plans are implemented, and make sure that the private sector is supported very keenly to also deliver what they could do. Last year, the interest rates were kept low. This year also, although interest rates have moderated up to some extent, there is a possibility that we can still provide the space for the private sector to do business even better. And I think going forward, what would be vital is for the private sector to have the energy as well as the support to be able to deliver on the promise that it has. There is plenty to be done. There are many instances where we can definitely do even better than what we have done. The new horizons that will open out with the new laws, as well as COVID pressure being now released, could be a very useful stimulus for the economies to go forward. So my invitation to all those who are in the private sector is to get back to work, and for the government sector also to get back to work. We have plenty to do. These next few years are going to be extremely vital for the well-being of the nation. The current challenges that we have need to be addressed in the short term, and we are doing that now. So I believe going forward, we'll be together to make sure that Sri Lanka can enjoy a 6+ growth as well as stability, which would lay the platform for a very useful drive forward of our economy for the future. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, sir, for that very insightful speech, which set the needed direction for our inaugural post-budget forum. With that, let me now invite Mr. S.R. Attygalle, Secretary to the Treasury of Ministry of Finance, to deliver the guest speech. Over to you, sir.
So, good afternoon, Governor, other panel members, and my friends at the Central Bank. Thank you for inviting me to this discussion on Budget 2022. I think by now I'm sure that you know something about the budget and also has formulated various views. Let me, however, give you my take on this. As Governor mentioned, this is a growth-centric budget. This budget was formulated to boost the signs of growth that we have been experiencing since the pandemic. And the government is of the view that ultimately the sustainable economy that it wants to bring about is only possible with an aggressive drive towards bringing the structural reforms that will promote investments and productivity. As such, the budget can be looked at as a budget that has targeted reforms aimed at broadly 4 aspects. One is to strengthening the external position, shift to manufacturing-based investments, supporting the vulnerables in a targeted manner, strengthening the fiscal position. I must say that if you read the budget carefully, the issues in the external position is well highlighted. It is demanded of the country to speedily move into non-debt creating sources that include mainly ensuring that the exporters are encouraged and foreign investors are attracted. Exporters will be rated, and depending on the rating, they can quickly move through customs. I suspect most of our exporters will fall into this category and will therefore be able to cut down some of the time, money, and energy spent on such activities by a significant amount. We will also streamline the approvals required from the different multiple agencies. That is, visits to multiple agencies to get approvals will not be required. This will be applicable to over 1,700 HS codes or line items. Further, HS code rationalization will happen. Some para-tariffs will be removed. The budget also introduces the concept of free port. Already, the relevant Finance Act has been drafted. Further, we will also simplify the strict rules currently in place with regard to registration of ships, etc., thereby leveraging on Sri Lanka's strategic location as a naval hub in the global context. All signs points to a revival of exports and an expansion and diversification of the export basket. I think the Honourable Minister of Finance will also inform further reforms later pertaining of encouraging exporters. The government has also decided to have a standing investment committee to resolve issues pertaining to investments. Already such a mechanism exists and we will decide on the best way forward. Regulations and laws which have already started to be simplified will move forward. These include quick dispute resolution and arbitration, the establishment of separate commercial courts, etc. Then the drive towards development is well recognized in the budget with a public investment program in excess about 900 billion, aimed at inclusive development through the promotion of areas like organic agriculture, irrigation, Surakumuganga, that is the environment side, then the roads for the connectivity, renewable energy, and water for all. To fast track these projects, we will reform the procurement process, making it simplified, because often the envisaged public investments do not materialize, mostly due to delays in procurement processes. In addition, I am also glad to note the approach that the Minister of Finance has taken pertaining to support the vulnerable. He is very clear and realistic in his assessment. The Samurdhi is a program that, like many, has the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that, yes, it has supported many to survive. The bad is that it is not helping those who actually deserve to be helped. The ugly is that it has created a consumption and dependency culture when it should be a culture of investment and savings. This is why the budget has proposed several reforms, including a scientific approach to identifying the Samurdhi recipients and the reforms to the Samurdhi banking system. The COVID pandemic has highlighted the extent and the depth of the informal sector. That is why the targeted support schemes, may it be women entrepreneurs, SMEs, artists and event managers, the three-wheel drivers, etc., have been identified under the theme Securing the Home Economy. The development work will be moved in a way, it will trickle down to the smallest unit, like the Gramaniladari unit, and is also expected to ensure that the development reaches every corner of the country. I am glad that the Honorable Minister of Finance has been blunt, even to his own party members, to ensure that this is a depoliticized and truly impactful use of funds. The government continued objective to create and strengthen an entrepreneur class is further apparent by the incentives and the program targeted towards the startups, with business registrations in 2022 being free. Already the government procurement mechanism has provided space for startups, and we hope to expand that space further. The fiscal side. The fiscal position is a function of the activities that is undertaken in the society. A few new taxes and most one-off has been introduced, including the imposition of 25% tax surcharge on taxable income over rupees 2,000 million. The 2.5% social security contribution, to name a few. You will agree that this compensates the efforts made for vaccinations, which has allowed the country to vaccinate almost 70% of the citizens, and now in the booster shot stage, and COVID combating activities undertaken, which is a huge investment from the government side. But perhaps the most important is that the government's drive towards an improved tax administration, including the use of these IT-backed support, online payment platforms, artificial intelligence, and data analytics. The aim is to get the revenue to at least 15% by 2025. I must also mention that the proposal to auction telecommunication frequencies is expected to facilitate a new market. Expenditure management is to be strictly imposed, in that while the resources for administration needs to be better utilized, KPIs introduced for performance management, SOE reforms are to be followed up. This will include improving the management, better governance, the structural changes including tie-ups with the private sector, to name a few. Underutilized and unutilized assets will see a broad basing of its ownership structure and rationalization. The fiscal deficit, we will ensure to remain in the 8.8% range in 2022 and to taper down further. The financing will be a challenge, but given the tourism is now reviving, exports are also doing well and will increase with the incentive that is provided. I think we will become comfortable in the next 12 to 18 months. This will be further strengthened when broad basing of the ownership of several non-strategic, underutilized and unutilized assets are realized. We are aware that doing business is not easy nor cheap. That is why the government is keen to ensure that the reforms of the public sector, the social safety net schemes, and the external sector are fast implemented. We must also be able to differentiate between the investments and procurements. You will notice that the reforms are well integrated. They are aimed at reducing the cost of production and improving productivity. The impact of these reforms may take a while, but we will do everything to fast track the implementation. This is perhaps the only time the implementation is also looked at with the officials and the political domain both being given the responsibility. I must say that the budgets do not necessarily have answers for all the issues. Budgets provide the framework for solutions to be forthcoming, and this budget is like that. It's a medium-term budget that needs to be implemented. So I will stop here, and then we can take questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for that comprehensive speech which explained the rationale behind the budget presented. We are much grateful to you for accepting our invitation and spare your time with us, even after spending a very busy time working on the budget itself. Thank you, sir. So now with that, we can move towards the panel discussion, should be moderated by Dr. Chandranath Amarasekara, Director of Economic Research Department. And as I said earlier, you can direct your questions, if you have any, through the Q&A option on Zoom platform. So we will be taking them up during discussion. So let me now cordially invite Dr. Amarasekara to commence the panel discussion. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Krishan, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And we just heard from the Governor of the Central Bank and the Secretary to the Treasury on the overall strategy of the country in facing the challenges before us, the measures already taken to address these, and of course to ensure that stability is maintained, the vision behind the budget, the macroeconomic implications of the budget, and also macroeconomic prospects for the country. And also thank you very much, ST, for setting the expectations right from the budget. And with that, we can move on to the panel discussion. But there is a slight adjustment to the plans, as I heard. And it seems that both Governor and ST may have to leave early. Therefore, we have decided to take up the questions that we have already received that need to be directed to Governor and ST. So if with the permission of the 5 eminent panelists, let me direct some questions to Governor and ST at this stage. And the first question that we have, I think this is for Governor, but ST could also chip in. Governor, the first question is that policy inconsistency has been a major concern for domestic and foreign investors, as well as businesses alike. Do you think the budget has laid the foundations for a consistent policy framework, or has it created more uncertainties as to the policies that the market can expect in the period ahead? I think you spoke about the 6-month roadmap that the central bank presented. Essentially, if you can enlighten us as to whether you think the budget is consistent with what was said in the roadmap, it will be very helpful. Thank you.
I think there are no differences vis-a-vis the two, the roadmap and the budget. There is no policy inconsistency between those two. But I think those are addressing different issues as well as different areas. So that's pretty straightforward. But at the same time, we must appreciate that no policy can be continued without changes at all. Some changes need to be done. There will be always the need to tweak certain policies, to improve certain policies, and that kind of a freedom and space must be available to any government in the implementation of policies. Policy consistency does not mean that once you set a policy that it will be there forever without any change. That's not what is, I think, contemplated. However, this budget, if you look at it, you'll find that there have been no ad hoc changes that has been difficult for people to comprehend. The only change has been that there is imposition of a surcharge, which I think many people would understand and appreciate, is for a good reason, in the sense that we all know that there has been a substantial expenditure that has to be met by the government in relation to the COVID situation. as well as in the aftermath of the COVID. And in order to provide some space to deal with that, I think the government has a responsibility to also rake in some taxes in order to support that expenditure. So that has been, I think, the basis on which the government has had a change in policy, if it were. If you call a imposition of a surcharge as a change in the policy, that has happened. But beyond that, I think the basic fundamentals of the economy hasn't been changed. So that is an important message that has been given. And notwithstanding the large number of pressures that the government had to encounter, as well as the central bank had to encounter, the changes have been minimal, and changes have not been in any way adding fresh burdens which are of a very difficult nature. But naturally, those have been had to be implemented. We also know that there are many global conditions that have been extremely serious. The commodity prices have risen quite sharply. All over the world, they're experiencing very sharp inflation. The US is experiencing the highest inflation ever in the last 30 years. So these are all tough conditions that we are all having to face. So in that sense, some changes in policy could be tolerated, I guess. And in that sense, I would generally agree with the proposition that the government has been able to, by and large, keep its policy consistency and ensure that there is no undue surprises to the stakeholders as well.
Thank you very much. I think you answered the part of the next question that we have received as well. Before moving on to ST, let me read it out to the two of you. It says the budget spoke about the challenges of rising cost of living and long-term remedies. But what is the assurance that the government will be able to tackle this challenge during the budget year, as already cost of living is skyrocketing? Governor, you addressed that question to some extent, but if you can get the views of ST on both, that will be very helpful.
I think Chandranath, it has been addressed. That's why I said there is a portion or a part in the budget about targeting the vulnerable groups. So we are aware about the cost of living, the prices going up, mainly due to external factors also. But still, the government has, in a way, identified that. And in the minister's speech yesterday, he mentioned about the targeted support, or in Sinhala we call it Sahana Malla, where a substantial amount of funds have been allocated. That is to identify the bottom layer or the most vulnerable groups, households, and support them. And that is also through mainly roughly about 50% coming from the local vicinity, the stuff, and other stuff domestically produced, say for milk powder, etc. So that will improve from one side the production side also to be strengthened. But the vulnerable groups have been in a way looked in this or supported in this budget, Chandra.
Thank you very much. Quite clear. And Governor, a popular question that is being asked now is that there were rumors that vehicle imports will be allowed from this year's budget, but no such policy was announced. It goes on to say that Sri Lanka has not had motor vehicle imports for 2 years. Also, the budget is planning to tax motor vehicle repairs as well. What is the government's policy on vehicle imports? I know you are the governor of the central bank. Maybe if ST can also add to what governor says, that will be helpful. Governor, the invitation is to you.
Thank you for that. But I think the person who can best answer that is Secretary.
I think, yes, the vehicle imports was stopped somewhere in March 2020, right? So the space available to open up is limited. I think you will agree with that. So when the things are good, definitely these restrictions, because we are not very happy with these restrictions, that I have to admit. But given the circumstances, certain measures have to be taken. So until the BOP side or the external side improvements are at least visible, these restrictions will be there for a while. So I don't think it's a priority in, I don't know, some may disagree with me, but the vehicle, the available vehicle fleet is adequate, what we feel, at least for next 6 to 7 months, or at least in the not immediately we will open it up. That's my view about that.
Thank you. And the next question that we've received is, it seems that the government will rely on bank borrowing to finance the budget deficit. Is there any space left for this after printing a large amount of money from 2020? And again, I think, Governor, you have already responded to it in the past several fora that you've attended. What is the reluctance to go to the IMF and refinance through sovereign bond borrowing? Thank you.
I have already dealt with that in my opening remarks, because even if you go to the IMF will ask you to do some reforms, which most of it we have already done. The need to increase the prices in line with commodity prices the world has been done. And that's a very, very important reform, which many people would have been reluctant to do given the political circumstances. But the government had the courage to do that in order to ensure that stability is maintained. We have also brought in new avenues of inflows into the country, which is the non-debt inflows that I spoke to you about, the government-to-government loans, as well as central bank to central bank swaps, all of which have been structured now and are being pursued. Again, something that the IMF would have probably have said. But the IMF may have also said certain items which I think may not have gone down very well politically, would have been to cut pensions or to cut the government spending on essentials and vulnerable areas, which could have posed some tremendous problems for the country, and the entire basis of our political structures may have been disturbed. And also, if we are able to deal with our debt without having to default, I think that's very important. Which is the creditor? Who is the creditor who would like to go through the pain of a restructuring? And while such a restructuring is going ahead, is there any way that you can borrow even while that period is going on? So these are the tensions that a lot of people do not seem to appreciate when they just say, go to the IMF and try and sort it out. We have sorted it out. We are sorting it out. We are also having plans which puts in place the new way in which we are going to deal with this situation. So I think that's something that we need to understand clearly. I'm glad that you asked this question again and someone had asked that question, because it is vital that we make sure that we deal with these situations at the same time by bringing in certain sustainable changes in our economy, which is also what we are doing. If you think about the non-debt inflows, we are monetizing certain underutilized assets, where we are looking at securitization of certain inflows. These are all new areas which we perhaps should have thought through in the past, instead of relying only on the international sovereign bonds. So the fact that we have built up a large amount of international sovereign bonds, which is causing us some element of vulnerability, and we are addressing that with new instruments and new inflows, I think is the best way forward. And that is being done by the government and by the central bank. And I believe that's what we really need to do at this stage, and not just rely on some mantra where nobody really knows even what is in store as far as how it is to be dealt with.
Thank you very much, Governor. And the next question is to ST. Analysts have repeatedly pointed out that revenue enhancement is a must if Sri Lanka is serious about fiscal consolidation. Without a broad-based increase in indirect taxes, are the revenue expectations given in the budget realistic? Or are we to expect a large budget deficit for the third year running? It also seems that a part of recurrent expenditure is going to be reclassified as public investment. What is your view on this?
Yeah, now I think Governor, or you mentioned about the stability, the confidentiality, the confidence that the investors are asking. So I think we clearly in 2020 we mentioned that the tax structure that we have brought in will not be at least in the broad parameters that will be there. So I think in this budget also, as Governor mentioned, we have stick to that. But given the circumstances, there may be certain small adjustments done where from the government side, especially with these COVID-related activities, we have done a huge investment, right? Thereby, especially the vaccination program and the COVID-related activities. So there should be some support for that. That's why these one-off taxes came in. But if we can bring the growth that we envisage, right, that will create the space for the debt payments and country moving forward. So I don't think that there should be major changes or augmenting the tax rate, etc. But given the broad framework, if we can support the investments, entrepreneurs, etc., and then move the growth rate up, that would help to, in a way, sustain this the activities or the fiscal side activities.
Thank you very much. And the final question. No, actually, there are two questions. One is to Governor as well as to ST. Can you both list 3 topmost priorities that you think are required both to manage the current situation and move towards a sustainable growth strategy?
Well, I think that's a fairly complex but an easy question to answer. As I have mentioned on many occasions, the imperative that we should have in our budget making as well as in our economic management is, number one, should be growth, and equally there should be stability. Those two go hand in hand. Growth and stability are vital in order to ensure that a country can move forward. In so doing, we also got to take certain steps with regard to other priorities at given times. Right now, we have priorities of managing our foreign exchange, managing our debt, as well as managing our fiscal deficit. Not in that order, but all 3 are extremely important to deal with. So I think if we look at growth, stability, and managing the current challenges, those would be the most important priorities that we should be looking at. I believe the government has identified those as being priorities. We from the central bank have identified it as priorities, and that's the first part of dealing with any challenge of that nature, to recognize that there is a difficult situation here, and once you recognize that, taking the necessary steps to deal with that. If you see the government's budget, the need to address the fiscal deficit has been very clearly enunciated. They have given a path as to how the fiscal consolidation is to be done. I'm sure the Secretary can elaborate on it further. We in our roadmap have given the way in which we would deal with the issues that are burning right now. So that shows that the authorities are conscious of the situation and are taking the steps to deal with it. We are not hiding our heads under the sand like an ostrich, and we are actually dealing with it upfront, and that's important. And some of the steps that we have taken are bold steps, are steps that need to be done at this current moment of time. And the fact that the government has the courage and the ability to face up to these challenges is an important message for the other stakeholders as well.
Yeah, I think, Chanana, the stability is very important. So the government, what in this budget also, what we have tried here is to build that environment, supporting environment for the especially for the private sector to move forward, to bring the growth that all are trying to achieve, and bring the country up, you know. So that type of reforms are embedded in this, and if we can make these things a reality, I think the country would be in a better position, definitely.
Thank you very much. And the last question is from one of our Sinhala journalist colleagues. These for ST, please explain more about the new 25% surcharge tax. If you can do that in Sinhala, that will be very good.
125 tax එක අලුත් දෙයක්ුත් නෙමෙයි. මේවා surcharge කලිනුත් ඉදිරිපත් කරලා තියෙනවා. මේක කියලා තියෙන්නේ 2021 tax year එකේ, ඒ කියන්නේ මාර්තු මාසේ සමහර ඒ වගේ ගිය අවුරුද්දේ දෙසැම්බරේ, සමහර companies වල මාර්තු 31. ඒ tax එක ඉවර වෙන එකේ taxable income එක මිලියන 2000ට වැඩි නම් ඒකට යම්කිසි tax rate එකක් තියෙන්න ඇති. ඒකට අමතරව තව 25% surcharge එකක් දාලා තියෙන එක තමයි කරලා තියෙන්නේ. තේරුණාද දන්නේ පැහැදිලිද දන්නේ.
Thank you very much.
Basic ඒක surcharge එකක්. තමන් ගෙවපු ප්‍රමාණයක් තියෙනවනේ. තමන් ගෙවපු ප්‍රමාණය සහ දැනට මේ tax year එක ඉවරයි. එතකොට මොකද 21 මාර්තු වලින් ඉවරයි මේක. ඒකෙදී taxable income එක කියන්නේ tax එක impose කරන ප්‍රමාණය මිලියන 2000කට වැඩි නම් තමන් ගෙවලා ඇති එක rates වලට ඒකට තව 25% ගෙවන්න කියන එක තමයි සරලව කියනවා. වැඩිපුර ටිකක් ගෙවන්න කියන එක තමයි කියන්නේ. surcharge එකක් අර ගමන කියපු විදිහට වචනේ surcharge.
Thank you. I think it's quite comprehensive.
Yeah, by 2000 million, රුපියල් බිලියන 2කට වැඩිය. It's not a small number, right?
Thank you. And I think we can move on to the panel discussion. Thank you very much, ST and Governor and ST.
Thank you
for participating.
Chandranath, can I leave?
Of course you can. Of course you can.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandranath. And I hope you all will have an excellent discussion. And thank you for the participants as well. And I hope that all of you will get a very good understanding of the budget and the current conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And moving on to the panel discussion, as mentioned earlier, we have 5 eminent panelists who will each make 10-minute deliberations on their respective sectors to begin with, and then we can have another Q&A afterwards. If I may briefly introduce them, first we have Mr. Duminda Hulangamuwa, who is a senior partner of Ernst & Young and its head of tax practice. Duminda is also a council member and deputy vice chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Second, we have Mr. Krishan Balendra, who is the chairman of John Keells Holdings PLC. He's also the deputy vice chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce and the honorary consul general of the Republic of Poland in Sri Lanka. Then we have Mr. Jonathan Alles. Mr. Alles is the managing director and the CEO of Hatton National Bank PLC. He's on several boards within the HNB group and in the banking industry. In addition, he serves as a director in the Sri Lanka Banks Association. The fourth member of our panel is Mr. Hasitha Premaratne, who is the Group Finance Director of Brandix. He leads the overall finance function of the group and is also responsible for strategy and long-range planning. He's the Managing Director of Brandix India Apparel City and overlooks all joint ventures and investments of Brandix. And last but not least, we have Mr. Thilak Piyadigama, who is currently the CEO of Sanasa Development Bank PLC. He was also a member of the Lanka Financial Services Bureau and a governing council member of NIPM. And I would like to invite Mr. Duminda Hulangamuwa first, and from you, Duminda, we would like to hear about the major changes introduced to the tax structure and the impact on tax payers. You have 10 minutes, as I said. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandranath, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me, Chandranath?
Yes, very well.
All right. So, when Dimdu spoke to me, I told her that I will talk on some of the taxation that have been introduced by the 2022 budget. Briefly, I won't go through the whole thing. So I have done you can see it, right? So I will skip these slides and I'll just go to the one that deals with taxation. The first one is the surcharge that was introduced. What Mr. Article referred to. So the 25% tax at the moment, the law is, the whole base of taxing is not very clear. But what is clear is that the tax will be levied on companies and individuals who have reported a taxable income in excess of rupees 2 billion in the year of assessment 2020-21. So that is the year that has been completed, which returns are to be filed in November. And the rate of tax is 25%. Now, the issue that can arise from this or not clear is, of course, taxable income means people who pay corporate tax. So in that category, you have people who have paid tax at 14%, people who pay tax 18%, and 24%. So, which means all of them will pay the 25% of their taxable income, so irrespective of the concessional rate given to them in the respective areas. Also, there's a growing argument since the proposal has been announced as to why only tax-paying companies should be paying this 25%. They already contributed to the Treasury in form of their own taxes. So why can't you tax also those who are not paying income tax? So this debate is going on. I mean, what is best? So it's the government who has decided in the end. But from a chamber's perspective, we also view that everyone should pay some element of tax. So that's our principle. So on that basis, it is our view that this should have been better if it came as a surcharge or income tax rather than as a tax on a certain sector of the economy, which is earning profits beyond 2 billion. The second issue that is not very clear is, are you going to give marginal relief? See, what happens is, whatever marginal relief is, if someone earns a profit of 1,999 million, he doesn't pay anything. But a person who earns 2,001 billion pays 25%. So that is what is called marginal relief. So it's not fair by those who miss it by 100 million and those who are above that over 100 million, because they are liable to the tax at the entire 25% rate. Then the other issue that has to be taken into account is the double taxation of income. For instance, in a group company where there are so many subsidiary companies, assuming that those subsidiaries on their own have earned more than 2 billion rupees individually, that is not collectively, but as individual companies, if they have earned 4 billion rupees, 2 billion rupees, then that person will be liable to the tax at 25%. And if that subsidiary company declares a dividend to the holding company, then the dividend, if that dividend exceeds 2 billion rupees, collectively the dividend they get from all subsidiaries is over 2 billion, then should that person pay again? So it's double tax. Those are the issues that need to be addressed and resolved. And we are in the process of making submissions to government to address these matters. Then the other one is one-time tax. So these are both one-time taxes. Is the 3% additional tax on banks and financial institutions on the base they pay VAT on financial services. So what they're currently paying is 15%.
I'm sorry, we cannot see the slides moving.
So one-time tax. This is on the VAT on financials, as I told you. So this will be additional 3% the banks have to pay based on the last year's base of VAT on financial services that has to pay 4 installments. So this is a very straightforward thing. There is nothing sort of controversial about it, except that they have to pay additional 3%. The only issue in these retrospective taxes, both in respect of the 25% tax and this VAT on financial, is that most companies have already declared dividends and they have reinvested their profits that they have earned. So where's the cash to pay is a question a lot of people are asking, because already this is based on last year's profits. So whether it's banks or others, the 3% or the 25%, they've already invested those monies that they have earned. They have paid their shareholders in form of dividends. So they don't have the 2 billion in their kitty to pay the balance, the tax that they have to pay on this. So that's the question that a lot of people are raising. Next one, please. Yeah. So on the VAT, I won't go through it. There's no significant change. It's only a recognition of donations for medical equipment. You can skip this. It's not a significant item to come as a budget proposal. So you can skip this. Yeah. So this actually next tax is a social security contribution. Next slide. Yes. So this is the again new tax equivalent to a turnover tax which they are imposing. So this is basically, I think, equivalent of a nation's billion tax which we had last year. Threshold for liability is 120 billion rupees per annum, applicable 1st April 2022, and the rate is 2.5%. Now the issues arising from here are one thing, it is a tax on turnover. Two, banks and financial institutions, since the central bank is here, I want to mention this especially because, VAT on financial services was introduced to banks and financial institutions because they were not liable to VAT. Now, that is why they pay as high as 15% on their profits and the value addition because they were not paying turnover tax. But now, by introducing a turnover tax on banks and financial institutions, also unless they are exempted, will effectively drive up the cost of doing business for a bank significantly. As much as 65 to 70% is our estimate. We are just in the process of calculating that. As much as 70%, because if 3%, if they can't pass it down, this 2.5%, they'll be actually to absorb it. But we believe it will be passed down. So it's presumed that this will go across the banks, manufacturers, services, exports, retail trade, across all industries it will go through, unless there is some exemption. But the issues that we already highlighted to the Secretary of Treasury in the course of the morning sessions that we had for EY presentation was that there are low margin businesses. For example, a distributor, retailer, reseller in the provinces who distribute Unilever products or tobacco products or whatever are getting a margin as low as 2% or 2.5%. Petrol stations operate at lesser margin than that. So they can't afford simply to pay 2.5% on their turnover. So there has to be some kind of relief that the government had to give for that sector. Secondly, there are people, certain products that are price controlled. Those price control products also will have to be given some relief in order to adjust for this 2.5%. In the case some companies, 2.5% directly eat into the entire margin they make. So those are some of the issues that the government had to consider. But we recognize the government also needs money, all that is correct, but then they'll have to consider the practical implications of this tax on business and industry in general. Then this is the implement special goods and services tax. This is not. This also is not a new tax from what we hear. Sorry. So this is actually going to be replacement of existing taxes. So this was proposed in the last year's budget. There are 5 industries they mentioned last year: there is motor vehicle, liquor, tobacco, betting and gaming, and telecommunications. Since they were subject to a multiple of taxes like excise duties and VAT, in the case of liquor and tobacco, and in the case of telecommunications with telecommunications levy, they will consolidate, all the taxes will consolidate into one tax, and they'll be imposed as a special goods and services tax. So this bill was not presented to Parliament, although announced last year's budget. This is what is going to be implemented next year, they say. But the problem that we foresee here is that this tax is already settled. I mean, these are all handled by the respective institutions. There may be administrative weaknesses like any tax, but they're handled by the institutions. So why bother to change and establish excise tax, VAT, and introduce a new tax altogether? And secondly, why should this tax administration and the collection of tax be taken to the Ministry of Finance from the respective government departments? So that we can't see the rationale of that, because these government departments are equipped. I mean, there are weaknesses, inefficiencies, true, but they are equipped to handle the collection of these taxes and administer these taxes, and also handle the dispute resolution part, and be taken away and go to the Ministry of Finance. So that rationale, we can't see the reason for that. Yes, so this is again on the same special goods and services tax. As I told you, yeah. So these are the, as I told you, these are the taxes that are subject to this special one. So next one actually is a license fee. This is not very clear, but I think I know what this is. The special license fee was proposed to be charged to the leisure industry. I think this may be to do with gaming and levy. I don't know, because there are no particular reference made or any specifics given. So I believe this is going to be a tax on issuing licenses for gaming industry or whatever, and that is a additional revenue collection. Telecommunications, 5G will be auctioned, they have said, and there's additional revenue expected from the 5G auctioning. So actually, Chandra, those are the significant taxes. The other taxes on these motor vehicles, meeting accidents, and then for restoration of existing motor vehicles, I don't know. I really don't know what the base of that tax is, because that is already there in the Motor Traffic Act, and how they are going to tax it. I don't know, and how significant it's going to be. I will have to wait and see. So this is not affecting a broader section of the community. I don't want to discuss that matter here. But the principal taxes that are being proposed in the budget, especially the social contribution to social security, 2.5% and 25% super gains tax, and this SGT have been mentioned. Those are the three principal items. There is no other significant ones. So with that, I'll conclude. And if there are any questions, I'm pleased to take.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the comprehensive presentation. And if you can move on to Krishan, and from you, if we can hear a bit about the impact on diversified businesses as the one that you are heading, that would be really great. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Center for Banking Studies of the Central Bank for inviting me as a panelist for this event. I think in terms of the impact on business generally, I think the main impact is from the new taxes that have been introduced. And I was going to talk a little about the issues around that, but I think Duminda has covered that very well. So I don't need to really get into that. And I know we are short of time as well, and I'll be here, of course, for any questions. Just on, there were comments on one area that the John Keells Group is involved in on the leisure side, reference to encouraging wellness tourism and other forms of tourism like conferences and so on, and establishing new Ayurveda treatment centers. So all that, of course, is very welcome, whatever that can be done to encourage more investment in the industry. One request that the relief that the industry had asked prior to the budget and was hoping for something, although there was no mention of that, is that when the debt moratoriums end for hotels, to have some kind of debt restructuring where there will be an extended period for repayment. I think that request had been made to the Treasury and the Central Bank. There wasn't any mention on that in the budget. As you know, the impact of the pandemic in the last 2 years has been unprecedented, in particular on the hotel sector. I mean, we've never had a situation, even at the height of the war, where hotels have been completely shut and had 0% occupancy for extended periods of time. Having said that, I think, partly because of the successful vaccination program, we are now seeing a gradual pickup in tourist arrivals, and the forward bookings are quite encouraging. We have 4 resorts in the Maldives, and in the Maldives, where the country opened up for tourism well before Sri Lanka, we have seen tourism now bouncing back to normal. So month of November, and then going forward, actually, it's looking even better than normal. So I think there is hope that even in Sri Lanka, we will see quite a rapid rebound in tourism. Apart from that, I think generally for business, some of the other highlights are that the efforts to control the fiscal deficit, I think that will help to keep interest rates at manageable levels, because a higher fiscal deficit can result in the private sector being crowded out from credit. So some of the revenue enhancing measures, including the use of technology to increase the tax net, those in the tax net, some of the expenditure measures, such as the focus on financial management at public institutions, the focus on loss-making SOEs, the focus on a results-based management system. There was reference to key performance indicators and so on. All that can contribute to a lower fiscal deficit. Also expenditure management. I mean, one example was not commencing construction of new buildings for the state sector, and also other various expenditure management measures, all of which is very welcome. Some other areas, the allocation of funds to develop infrastructure in investment promotion zones and SME development zones, the removal of registration fees for startups. I think it's good to see the country focusing on startups, in particular. Digital startups can be a critical driver for innovation and economic growth. The investment in the legal infrastructure, again, a big bottleneck for doing business in the country has been the speed or the lack of speed in dispute resolution. There was reference to a 5 billion rupee allocation for legal infrastructure, which is also very welcome. The other interesting reference was to the energy hub plans. I think there is data now coming out that the country's capacity in the renewable energy front, in particular in wind power, can far exceed our own demand. So there could be an opportunity to export renewable energy. And there was a reference in the budget speech on creating this energy hub. And I think that is certainly a worthwhile area to pursue. The other area is around broadband access across the country. Again, very welcome and good for business as we link up our retail partners and distribution partners across the country, where we have seen some issues around connectivity. And also, as a big player in tourism, road development, again, getting easy access to different parts of the country. There was a big reference to more investment in highways and enhancing the quality of the roads across the country. So I just wanted to touch on those areas. I was going to talk on the tax surcharge and the social security contribution and so on, but I don't want to repeat what Duminda said, and I will be here for any questions. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think you touched upon some of the questions that we have received as well. Thank you very much for that. If we can move on to Mr. Jonathan Nullis, and he'll be talking for 10 minutes on the impact of the budget on the overall financial sector. Over to you.
Thank you, Chandranath. And let me also thank the Center for Studies at Central Bank and the Central Bank for inviting me this afternoon. Interesting conversations. I'll also probably avoid, talking of what has already been covered. But by and large, I think it's accepted that there are plenty of opportunities in terms of looking at long-term sustainable opportunities by, driving certain sectors. Krishan has alluded to many, be it power, agriculture, and then more specifically what the banks are sort of focused on working with the agriculture SME, trying to drive exports, the digital business. Remittance is going to be an important part. So in all of those, the banks have got a critical role to play and are looking forward to. I don't want to dwell on the capital gains or this surcharge, except for, I mean, it was explained in terms of the rationale, whether it was for the COVID bill or any other. Duminda alluded to it could have been broad-based and, spread across. And, to avoid these ad hoc natures, which tend to, upset investors and most investors who come into the banking or to the corporate sector to invest in those companies, like, a no surprise, smooth, long-term, sustainable cash flows which don't get disrupted with such significant change. I mean, I'm just thinking right now, next year, if this 25% kicks in for a payment in terms of cash flow, along with a 24% and an 18% VAT, that's almost like a 70% of your cash flows going out in the form of tax, and for which you have not earned some of those cash flows in 2022, which you'll need to look at. So some of those challenges will need to work out how it's done. But I suppose the slight difference that I would like to bring in is, banks are in a unique position where basically, unlike, whatever the saving that is expected from that, say it's 100 billion, is only 100 billion for the government. But that money with the finance sector and with the banks is worth $1 trillion, because the banks have this capacity to augment their capital 10 times over and lend it. And like Central Bank, Chandranath, already directs some of the banks' lending into exports, into, women entrepreneurship, into agriculture, and it could continue to do that into some of these areas that the government by itself might, struggle to do that. Already we saw, whether it's with the vulnerable segment, the Samurdhi, the Sahana Malla. Yesterday, the minister alluded to, saying that there is allegations that this is not been happening. It's not going to the right people. But when you have a distribution network of the banks and financial sector, which is, amounting to about 10,000 branches across the country, that you can actually spread it across and, track it to make sure that the allocations are happening into the right areas of development. So there, the finance sector and the banks actually partner the government in order to augment it way beyond this short-term 100 million that the government would probably struggle to allocate it to a few areas. Instead, they could have used us to, allocate close to $1 trillion on the balance sheet into the appropriate segments, which would fast-track some of the development that they need to make into, given that despite, the discussion that there is an improvement in the public investment, it's still maybe a 3/4 consumption and a 1/4 public investment. So this is where the finance sector and banks could have stepped in to bridge that gap and augment further investment into important areas, whether it's the ports, whether it's actually the industrial park. We could get into then the SME, the grassroots level financing, agriculture, manufacturing in a big way to promote digital fintechs on entrepreneurship and to be exports being a really important business that the government needed, that the banks need to support the initiatives that are actually already outlined in the October roadmap. So that is something that is worth thinking about, but we have a significant role to play in this budget and working closely with central bank. The SRR allocation towards renewable energy, the government's plan to have 70% renewable by 2030. Kishan just alluded to the opportunities. Banks would have the opportunity to bring green finance and support some of these facilities, some of these lending that needs to be made. It also is a good opportunity for us to work with our DFIs, MLAs, and other partners to support some of these sectors that the government wants to grow and look for long-term partnerships, which we are already beginning to see, beginning to work with. One of the concerns is we need to, while supporting the government's endeavor in managing some of the short-term cash flow requirements. I know from time to time we go overseas, we ask investors to come and invest in Sri Lanka, but then we need to walk the talk. We need to make sure that the investment climate for them, also with minimum surprises that we are actually looking to. These investors would actually like if banks are getting fully involved in working in the economy, making it work, developing people, developing the country, rather than only sort of being caught off guard, maybe moving out some part of a previous year's profit as tax. So, I mean, those are things that we can actually work. It's not something new. I think I saw from the KPMG document that it's happening for the last 60 years, but the smoother your cash flow is, it's more predictable for investors to come in. There's been much talk about different types of taxation. I like the fact that there's a lot of digitalization coming into tax. The acknowledgements are prompt. Still, it is fairly bureaucratic, and there's a bit of paper that needs to be done. I probably need another 30 seconds only, Chandana. And then basically, to us, based on what we have seen in the last year or so, I mean, we still find the process quite, time-consuming, unproductive, ineffective. So like Duminda said, taking out some of these things where the government departments are equipped to collect. Similarly, if you take things like payee, you take withholding tax, structures, frameworks were well in place in order to collect that, would have been efficient, would have generated more cash flows for the government when it actually needed it, rather than having to collect so much in areas. So for me, the two main points that I would bring is engage the finance and the banking industries, make them partners and work on those development areas and on those investment areas, at a balance sheet level and not necessarily at the bottom line level. And the next part is, let's see how do we actually optimize. Are the current methodologies that we adopt for taxation the best? I mean, why not the automated, where banks takes responsibility, finance companies take responsibilities, and the corporate sector for, say, remitting the payees as well as withholding tax. But I'm ready to take any questions as follow on, Chandana. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. And we can listen to the fourth speaker now. It's Mr. Hasitha Premaratne, and he will elaborate on the impact of the policies proposed in the budget on the manufacturing sector, and in particular, the export sector. Over to you, Hasitha.
Thanks, Chandranath, and thanks for inviting me to be here and share some thoughts, mainly covering the apparel sector and a bit of the extensions that comes into the rest of manufacturing and exports. So I'll touch on three broad topics which were stated in the budget, because I think the word export was mentioned multiple times in the budget, and I think we are at a time when probably we need to talk about exports more than ever before. So I think the first thing that was highlighted was that how we should look at the international markets and grow the presence in international markets so that the exports can benefit out of such endeavors. So on that front, there weren't any specifics mentioned as to how it will be done and what are the specific initiatives that need to be taken. But in our interactions before the budget speech and the related conversations, a few things were clearly discussed. One was the need for the FTAs, the free trade agreements, to continue. So as we all know, India-China FTAs are being discussed. UK going out of the GSP plus environment, obviously with the split in with the Brexit, UK going independently, the need for FTA with UK and some of the other key markets is something that's going on in the backyard. But I suppose the allocation and the reference in the budget related to the expansion of international markets will talk about how these FTA efforts will be fast-tracked to ensure that our exports will remain competitive and we can actually fight with the rest of the countries, especially the ones that have actually brought in these FTAs into play. Secondly, I think the big one is on the product side, because now we've been talking about in this, particularly in the apparel industry, we are talking about traditionally doing the standard basic products, but over the years, most of the players have augmented themselves, invested into innovation, and brought in new products, new product ranges, going beyond the traditional products, going into synthetics, going into more complicated, sophisticated products, which gives better pricing, better payment, and adds obviously complexity to your production as well, or the supply chain as well. But then I think that's a way in which we can keep the hook and be competitive in the global markets when we are engaging in the overall competitive environment globally with and to our customers. So in that context, I think what is important, in my opinion, is to look at encouraging more. There is the 200% capital allowance clause that has been there, and it's there for another year, actually till 2023. So that extent that has already been given earlier. And I assume that in the next budget, at least, there will be extension of that, because that's an area where people need to spend on, and the R&D front is something that is very important to lift our value of exports, particularly from the product perspective. And I'm talking about not only apparel, but in other export segments as well. So apart from the product innovation side, the other one will be the process innovation and automation side of things to stay competitive, because one of the bigger challenges that we face as exporters is that we have to fight the world at the end of the day. If your pricing is not competitive to maybe be Bangladesh or Vietnam or China or Cambodia, whatever the manufacturing destination is, then there is no way that we can talk about being relevant in the export world. So be it apparel or the broad export manufacturing industry, I think it's important that the investments towards this automation side need to come in, and that's where probably we've been talking about with the government on the need to extend these towards this innovation allowance towards some of these aspects as well, which gives you better productivity through automation and related work. So I think the fact that the international markets growth and looking at certain initiatives under that, though it's not specifically mentioned, these are some of the areas that may come as possible support and guidance from the government front. The second topic that I want to touch after expanding onto the international markets is about vertical integration. Now, that's something that was again highlighted a few times, to make raw material in the country so that the imported component of apparel or any other manufacturing merchandise that export will reduce and the value addition in the country will increase. So that's a very important thing. And in that context, I think it's been spoken about to invest 5 billion rupees into export zones, new zones to be brought in under BOI, one being in Nivard already in play, and there are 2 to 3 other locations that have been identified and in the process of moving forward. So one side is that to get the new zones and new capacity into put up industry in a more organized way. But other important thing which I didn't read in the budget speech or any other supporting documents is the fact that we need to also continue to invest into some of the existing zones, BOI zones, particularly the ones in Piyadigama, ones in Avisavella, Sitawaka we call it normally, Piyadigama and Hulangamuwa, a few others, but mainly the Piyadigama and the Sitawaka zones have a lot of bottlenecks related to water treatment and the fluent discharge part of it, which creates expansions almost impossible. Already the work has been done by the BOI to call the tenders and to move forward. So I'm sure a part of this funding will go into expanding the capacity requirements of the existing zones, which will give you an immediate boost, because the Ravurs and the new zones will be 2 to 3 years away, right? But these zones where companies are already set up and waiting to expand or waiting to add capacity, but unfortunately not been able to do so because of the restrictions and bottlenecks in this water capacities in particular, need to be addressed. So I hope that some of the monies will go to expand that existing areas as well. So that's the second thing where the vertical integration comes in, more the raw material to be made. So focused guidance, no tax incentives or anything has been spoken, but I think the infrastructure side of the focus is what the government is talking about in the budget. Third segment I want to touch is the tax administration and the related connectivity. Now here several clauses and several areas of the budget speech touched on the digital economy and the related benefits that need to be looked at, and that's a very important piece. I think previous speakers also highlighted this aspect. I would like to reiterate that particularly bringing the customs BOI and then of course the Inland Revenue RAMI system, and even for that matter look at whether the central bank monitoring systems, the banking systems can be integrated, because we have at the moment individual separate systems in each of these institutions that I spoke about, which kind of plays the platform of the country's import-export connectivity, but certainly they don't talk to each other. Those systems are not, I think, adequately talking to each other, if we put it that way. And if we do that, I think we'll definitely have a very seamless flow, including the digital invoicing to tax-related areas that can be brought in. So my take is that the focus has to be there to expand in that area and ensure that there will be a lot more work done so that not only just investing into the IT system, but also to train, educate the digital skills to the people who are working there, and they are not only the existing people, but also we may have to look at how to bring in that skill set to the new people and new talent also to be brought in there, because unless you do that, these systems will be there, but the using of those systems and the benefits that are coming out of this digitization can be always questioned. So I hope that some of the funds allocated in that name of digitization will be on those lines, and there will be more efforts being put in to bring the systems together and have a digitized economy so that there'll be convenience and there'll be transparency, there'll be traceability, which are very important words today in the new export world. So these are things that probably can really bring that tax administration piece also together. So Chandranath, these are the three things I wanted to touch on. Broadly, I mean, as I said before, these three have been mentioned about new international markets, vertical integration, and the tax administration side multiple times in the budget. So the specifics are not there, but I just gave a light of some of the thinking behind that we have been having with the government, conversations with the government in different areas. So hopefully these will be the ones that will augment, and maybe any other areas that are relevant and priorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hasitha. We hope so too, and hopefully we'll be able to, the government, the central bank, and the private sector will be able to work on these for the progress of the country. So finally, we have Mr. Thilak Piyadigama, who will speak on the impact of the budget on MSMEs and rural development. And obviously, as you noticed, rural development is another key focus area of the budget. Over to you, Thilak.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for having me. I want to thank CBS for inviting me. Just to talk about the SME sector and MSME put together, it's a very important sector for Sri Lanka's growth because it contributes 52% of GDP, and also it has created 40% of jobs and 7% enterprises. So obviously, this sector is very important, and focusing on that and growing further is very important for countries' future and countries' future growth plans. Then talking about rural, I'm sure we all know that about 80% of people are still in rural areas of Sri Lanka. So development of rural areas has a major impact on country's future and country's growth. So looking at some of these proposal what was mentioned in the budget proposal. So let me quickly take you through some of the things what I heard yesterday. So on the SME sector, it's by and large agri is part of that in Sri Lanka. So they were talking about moving from inorganic to organic, where there's a lot of allocations on the PD sides of 39 billion has been allocated, and also for agri-tech development. So there was a 22 billion allocation. This is very good news, but at the same time, we also know that this has to be sort of done in a manner that it does not upset the current production levels because of moving away from the usual fertilizer and all that has been used for the many years. So if it is not done well, I'm sure the agriculture can also have a bit of a difficult situation in terms of the production, given that 20% of our the employment is in agri, but it produces only 8%. So if this is not done well, it can actually create further difficulties in terms of producing more of our agriculture. And also there was another allocation of 1 billion rupees for fresh milk, in addition to funds that has been allocated already. That is also again good news. All this put together, intention is very good that agriculture sector can grow. So that will be a good news for Sri Lanka's aspiration to be a, there are even certain imports like rice can be completely stopped if we get our agriculture right. Then also, I think the budget speech mentioned a few times about utilizing underutilized lands and things like that, and giving for agri parks and so on, particularly for young agri entrepreneurs, which is very good. I think it can create a commercial farming in Sri Lanka, like most countries we have seen, but which is lacking in Sri Lanka. Then talking about again. I think Krishan and Jonathan both mentioned about infrastructure development, which is a very good news. There was an initiative for water for all. So there has been allocation of 49 billion, which is again a very good news. And also some of these monies, when it gets in rural areas, the economy also will, it will help grow the local economies as well. Then there was an initiative of the Vari Saubhagya, I think it's basically, take care of the tanks and lakes and things like that for agri development. The massive amount of money, 68 billion, has been allocated. Then for road development, primarily across Sri Lanka, I'm sure there will be rural development as well. The total allocation is 280 billion, which is very good news. Then there were a number of initiatives for rural development. They were talking about something called Gamasamga Pilisandara. The scope of the initiative is, yet to be sort of known. But it broadly is talking about uplifting standard of living and also development of rural infrastructure. So there have been allocation about 3 million per Gram Sevaka division. We have 14,022 Gram Sevaka division. So there's a bill of 3.3 billion has been allocated. So then there was another 31 billion has been allocated for home economy security. Basically targeting more relief for pregnant mothers and also economically challenged families, and also to establish a mini market, mini supermarket. Obviously, it's a good initiative, and if we can get this going, get the job done and fast track it, I'm sure we will have better outcomes out of it. Then also talking about, again, I think part of the rural development was, I think Minister mentioned about Samurdhi. And also he mentioned something very interesting, that the selection process of Samurdhi recipient, he mentioned that it should be more scientific. I mean, obviously there must be gaps at the moment. The recipient may not be the right one who's receiving this. So I mean, I'm sure it's a welcoming news than making it scientific and getting it right. Then we spoke about digitalization. I think all of us mentioned directly and indirectly about digitalization opportunities in Sri Lanka. The frequency, the auctioning of frequency of 5G and so on is a very welcome news, because 5G and also the fiber and broadband and so on going to give us a faster, I mean, I would say ultra faster internet access. That will have a huge impact on our economy, and we will get our efficiency and productivity right. So currently our internet penetration around 50%. I'm sure this can boost massively internet penetration, and it can give a lot of benefits. I mean, not only the payments, not only the logistics, even education, and basically anything what you can put on a mobile app can be delivered to households or any citizen in Sri Lanka. So obviously the infrastructure of internet will play a major role. So I think it's a very good news. Then moving on to specific to banks and the interest rate and so on. As we all know that the interest rate, the AWPLR in 2020 early part January was at 9.9. So successfully central bank intervened and brought it down to 5.7 by December 2020. But however, it has gone up slightly, almost about 100 basis points, 6.5. So if you can keep at that level, I think it's good for credit growth. But however, in terms of rural people, this is a bit of a not a very good news. It's because some of them, if not most of them, rely on income from their deposits as well. So when the deposits are low, obviously for when the lending side is low, it just can't be more. So when it is going down, the saving habits also can go away. In fact, this is very well visible now, having seen massive amount of cash in circulation in Sri Lanka. The pre-COVID time, it was around somewhere around 650 billion rupees at a time. Now it has gone to 975 billion, almost 1 trillion rupees in our pockets, which has no economic value. It does not contribute to Sri Lanka's growth. And I mean, if we bring that part of that to the banking system, obviously, we can do more credit, and also credit can be cheaper as well. And obviously, going back to the digital infrastructure development, which Finance Minister mentioned a few times, that could be the trigger for us to bring this money back to the system. So digitalization is required in most rural as well as in the SME space. So then we can add more value to our economy by having that money in more productive manner in the banking system. Obviously, we spoke about the taxes, which I'm not going to sort of repeat, but I just want to make the point. I think I quite agree with what Jonathan said. If this surcharge tax is not there, I'm sure the money which is going to retain in the banking system can have 10 times multiple positive impact if it is not taken away from the banks. And in fact, our tax bill, which is around 30-40% now, can go to about 60%. And in fact, that can have a serious repercussion in terms of credit growth, particularly in the areas like SME and rural, if you want to grow. So there's a risk as well. So obviously, when there's no retained capital, that can have a serious negative impact on credit growth. So I think that has to be taken into consideration before this gets implemented. I think those are the areas where I thought which relevant to SME and rural. Thank you very much again having me, and I'm available for question and answers. Thank you, Chanda.
Thank you very much for those excellent comments. And the organizers have agreed to give us about 10 more minutes for Q&A. We have several interesting questions that we have received, but I think most of them are directed towards policymakers. But let me try to twist them a little bit and get the private sector perspectives on some of them. I think this one could be directed to Jonathan. The question is this: what's the support to be offered to banks to drive remittance and inward investment accounts from the foreign countries or investors? These, as I said, these are directed to the government. I trust the GOSL should get involved in the banking sector to grow this pipeline effectively. But what is your perspective on that? How should the banking sector try to enhance remittance flows and inflows into the inward investment accounts, as HNB obviously is a very large player in this the remittance field in particular. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I think it's an important one. I alluded to it earlier also. This is one of the really important sectors in order to kickstart the forex requirements of the country. I mean, we are bullish that, slowly the tourism would revive, and, Governor alluded to 1/4 of the numbers would be a nice number to have in 2022. I think we all are, and we know we want to drive exports, but we should not neglect the remittance area. And I was sort of very pleased to hear the last meeting that we attended, that we are looking to send out 300,000 more Sri Lankans out into, jobs that are, well paid. And we have a logistics issue at the moment, and everybody is working round the clock to make it work. And, I just hope that's going to happen. So just to respond to the question, how can we work to make this happen? Because I believe the question is coming because remittance through the formal channels, through the banking sector, is probably seen a slight reduction, and instead we hear of people using the Hundia or the Hawala system and are able to get slightly higher rates on the back of rates being constrained between up to about 203. So some of the things that I think the government, central bank, and the banking industry are talking of is making sure that everybody who goes out with an account opened in the bank. We encourage them to remit the monies through us. We are looking at remittance cards. We are looking at taking remittances to the mobile to make it very convenient. Obviously, sooner than later, we would see the convergence of this bank rate and the rate that might exist out, which will take out the grey market and channel transactions within the banking industry. My request to all my colleagues in the banking industry is to drive product development around inward remittances that are coming in, and then drive entrepreneurship, drive savings, drive family business as well as family savings, and do not incentivize those that actually come from outside at the higher converted rate, but the ones that actually come through the banking system itself. So encourage all the employment bureaus and the others to make sure that everybody going out opens an account with the bank, and then keep in touch, have some ways of keeping in touch with this community there, continuously engaging them, talking of the various supports that bank can continue to support them while they are there to their families here. Start doing some entrepreneurship, align yourself to some of the target areas of the government, and support them to develop. I think we need to do this and engage this community proactively without letting them and them go to the grey market and the grey market aggressors to target our important resource of migrant workers. And my message to the white collars and those who have been out in Europe and other countries, for the last 40-50 years, the country has been safe, your foreign currency has been safe, we have nothing has been touched. And time to time you hear what will happen to our deposits, will we have to convert? You can see that none of that has actually come through. So in addition to encouraging the inward remittance from migrant workers, I would say to all our loyal Sri Lankans all over the world, this is the time for you to come and place some of your monies in Sri Lanka and be a partner of the resurgence of this important economic development plan that we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent message from the banking system. Duminda, there are two questions on taxation. These from one is from the media. Yesterday's budget yesterday's budget proposal introduced GST, but didn't mention about the percentage and the goods and services that it affects. That's the first question. And the second question, I think you responded, but if you can repeat, is 25% surcharge applicable for additional profit over 2 billion, or is it applied on total taxable profit where the profit is higher than 2 billion? Thank you.
Yes. So the first question, Channath, on the special goods and services tax is applicable. You see, this is coming from the last year's budget proposal. So at that time, the Honourable Prime Minister, at that time, Finance Minister, mentioned 5 items to be included into that list. That is liquor, tobacco, gaming, telecommunications, motor vehicle, and liquor. Those are the 5 items that he mentioned last time. So I believe that the special goods and services tax will extend only those 5 items, or even lesser than that. Now, the items are not known yet because the items to be listed for the SGT is coming through regulation, to be published by Gazette by the Minister. So he can decide what to include, what to exclude. And does not stop him from including any items in the future either. Like, for example, we had the, the levy that was, the import levy that was introduced, that also permitted the minister from time and again to introduce various levies. So these items identified for the moment are these 5 areas I told you, but that won't mean the law itself, the primary law. Secondary law, like the Gazette or the regulations, will permit the minister to include these items. So that's the answer to the first question. The answer to the second question is, it is not the excess of 2 billion, it's the total of 2 billion. So if you are 2.5 billion, it will be 25% of 2.5 billion, not 500 million. I believe that is how it will work. Other there is no logic to it.
Thank you. I think it's your response is quite clear. And Krishan, the question to you is about the tea sector. Tea is the second major export in Sri Lanka, giving substantial contribution to forex reserves. With the decision of applying organic fertilizer, there is a significant decrease in tea production. Therefore, according to this gentleman who's asking the question, this move will impact on forex earnings. What is your take on this, Krishan?
Yeah, okay, as John Keells, we are not directly involved in tea plantations anymore, or tea or rubber plantations. We have some tea factories under Tea Smallholder Factories PLC. I think there is an impact on quantity. We can see that through our tea factories, but we saw that the government is now allowing fertilizer for what they call commercial crops. So fertilizer will soon be available. So this shortage, or not shortfall in production that we are currently seeing, which isn't that material, that may just be a temporary impact because fertilizer may soon be available. But I'm possibly not the best person to ask this question because we are not directly involved in tea and rubber plantations right now as a group. But I think getting the fertilizer is now going to start being available for commercial crops. So that should help.
Thank you very much. And if we can move to Mr. Thilak Piyadigama. Thilak, there's a couple of questions. Again, I mean, these are all directed to policymakers, including us. But as the panel, I just want to get some insights from all of you. One question is, are we heading towards a higher interest rate regime with bank borrowing and financing? That Jonathan might also like to respond to this. And also there is a question about renewable energy. We didn't see any significant proposal on renewable energy. Do you have any views on that, Thilak?
Well, I think the first question, I believe there is pressure on markets, so it appears that the interest rates are going up, but still, I think, it has gone up by 100 basis points from last December to October 2021. So that signals there it might go up. The second one, actually, I'm also very surprised that there was no specific mention about the renewable energy yesterday, except I think Minister mentioned that government institution going to cut down the electricity bill by having renewable energy sources. But I believe for Sri Lanka, there's a huge opportunity. In fact, the bankers are taking our own initiatives to bring green finance, as I think Jonathan's mentioned. We do some work on that as well. I think that is something we should, work on. And I think that's a huge opportunity for Sri Lanka, as well as I think in general for banking as a business as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Would you like to add anything to what Thilak
Very
said?
quickly, I tend to agree with Thilak in terms of interest rates, especially if the foreign currency is less available and there's going to be pressure in terms of the 1.8 trillion shortfall coming from, let's say, T-bills and T-bonds. It can have an impact on interest rates. We've already seen it, though actually it has kind of tapered in the last week or two, which is, the thing is, at 5% and 4%, maybe the rates were too low, and Sri Lanka has seen rates at 15 and 20 and 25%, and I don't see it going anywhere close to that. So even if it moves up, 100 or 200 basis points, and somebody has to borrow at 1% a month or whatever, it's pretty affordable, and also it allows a little bit for, let's say, depositors to have something in it also for them, because over the last couple of years, some of them who rely on their deposits, who have just been earning 4-5%, have found it very difficult. So whilst, yes, there is a little pressure for rates to move up, I think we can, if we have taken it so low, we can afford to let it go up a little bit, as long as it doesn't go completely out of control. Still, transactions at SME level will be very much doable. Krishan alluded to, wind and the opportunities to, take it overseas. Yes, there may be no specific proposals, but we all know, and we have already had conversations even at central bank, Chandranath, with you all in terms of the SRR, when it's going to be given back, how we can use it only to use towards renewable energy, for us to start working with some of our green funding partners overseas. Already I'm starting to sort of get requests and people talking of further biomass waste to energy projects, but more importantly, lots of solar, and also innovating, given that the solar slates have now become significantly cheaper. That might be a fairly big play, even probably more than the wind and the biomass and the waste. So I think all this augurs well for Sri Lanka, going towards a more sustainable and green Sri Lanka, and I'm just looking forward to it, and I think we banks have got a big part to play there.
Thank you very much. And the last question is to Hasitha. Hasitha, what's the secret in high Bangladesh apparel earnings? What can we learn from Bangladesh?
Yeah, so I think Bangladesh has the scale. First of all, what they really did was went in big to invest into scale and large factories. So with a population of almost 160 million people, which is about close to 8 times of Sri Lanka, and also large portion of investments going to set up a lot of zones in different parts of the country. When as we speak, there are more zones coming up, and they took advantage of that, the infrastructure point of view, and then they took advantage out of their least developed situation in the economy and got access to a lot of duty-free markets. Example, Europe is duty-free to Bangladesh, Australia, Canada, even Japan, and certain part of Chinese exports to China is duty-free. So those duty-free segments have really played a big role in getting market access. That's why I highlighted earlier as well that the FTA requirement is absolutely necessary because we have GSP plus, but beyond that we need to look at what are the opportunities that are there when you're competing with the rest of the world. So apart from those multiple zones, a large workforce in hand, and also the bigger thing, they put it into play with the FTAs or the duty-free arrangements that they had with multiple developing markets, and that way they were able to accelerate at the right time with a low-cost base. So Bangladesh was a low-cost destination at a time, but today it's no more. It's not far away from Sri Lanka today, so it's not really the cost that really keeps them competitive, but it's really those FTAs or the duty-free access to the markets that really keep them going, and also ample amount of labor available still, and 80% of exports almost coming from apparel industry. It keeps them going in bigger scheme of things with a lot of government support.
Excellent. And with that, we have come to the end of the panel discussion, and I would like to thank all our panelists for extremely useful insights and perspectives on the budget. And as we know, the budget is a key piece in the overall policy framework that the entire economy as well as the external parties was waiting for. I would also like to thank the participants for active participation in the discussion. And finally, let me also thank the director and staff of the Center for Banking Studies for organizing this timely event, and invite them to formally conclude the proceedings. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Amarasekara. As correctly mentioned, we have come to the end of this post-budget forum. This was the first budget forum we conducted, that means CBS conducted. So finally, with that note, on behalf of Director of Center of Banking Studies, let me express my gratitude to Honorable Governor who chaired this event, as well as Mr. S.R. Attygalle, who delivered the guest speech. And apart from that, all our panelists, Mr. Duminda Hulangamuwa, Mr. Krishan Balendra, and Mr. Jonathan Alice, Mr. Premaratne, and Mr. Thilak Piyadigama. Thank you very much for joining with us to share your thoughts amid these busy schedules you have during the weekend. And also Dr. Amarasekara, Director of Economic Research, who moderated the panel discussion. Our gratitude is extended to you as well, sir. Further, on behalf of Director of CBS, I wish to thank all of you who joined with us for this post-budget seminar, without whom this would not have been a success. So that's from our end. Thank you very much once again. Have a good evening.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.